Welcome. I hope this is working. Welcome to Neuralink live update. We're going to tell you about the progress of the first patient with the Neuralink, Poland, and do a recap of the progress there. Then talk about what changes we were making for the second patient, which we're hoping to do an implant in the next week or so. And this is for our first product, which is called telepathy, which enables you to control a computer or a phone just by thinking. So we'll start off with just some introductions. DJ, you want to start?
Hi everyone, my name is DJ Sal. I'm an electrical engineer and a chip designer by training. I led the design of several generations of the Neuralink implant. Currently, I was on the founding team and currently a president.
I'm Matthew McDougall. I'm a practicing neurosurgeon and head of neurosurgery at Neuralink.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, head of brain interfaces applications.
And I'm Bliss. I'm a software engineer at Neuralink, trying to figure out how to turn brain activity into cool stuff in the world.
All right, thank you. So let's see. So we'll just get going into the presentation. Our first product is something, like I said, we call telepathy, which enables the person with the Neuralink implant to control their phone or computer just by thinking. And once you can control your phone and computer, you can essentially control almost anything, literally just by thinking. So there's no eye tracking or anything. It is purely your thoughts. This is really quite a profound device that can help a lot of people who have lost the connection between their brain and body. Imagine people like Stephen Hawking, imagine if he could communicate at the same speed as someone who still had the connection to their brain and body. It's really something that can help millions of people around the world. And it's part of our overall goal of enabling very high bandwidth connection between the brain and the rest of the world and your computers. The long-term goal, which sounds a little esoteric, is to mitigate the civilization risk of AI by having a sort of closer symbiosis between human intelligence and digital intelligence. But that'll take many years. Along the way, we're going to help solve a lot of brain injury or spinal injury issues. And then with our first product, telepathy, that's going to be really quite profound. There is also potential long-term for bridging the gaps. So if there are damaged or severed neurons, being able to span the gap between the brain's motor cortex to the spine to enable someone to use their body again. I think that would be very exciting, and that is something that is possible in the long term. And then our second product, which we've demonstrated to work with monkeys, is blindsight, which would enable someone who is completely blind, or lost both eyes, or completely lost their optic nerve to be able to see. So that's something that we hope to demonstrate in the future. So this just gives you a sense of what the device is. A way to think about the Neuralink device is like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch with tiny wires or electrodes. Those tiny wires are implanted in the brain and they read and write electrical signals. A lot of people think the brain is this incredibly mysterious thing. It is mysterious in a lot of ways, but it does operate with electrical signals. So if you can read and write those electrical signals, you can interface with the brain. And the device is sized so that it is the same size as the piece of skull that is removed. So if it's like a few centimeters diameter of skull that's removed, we replace that with the device after implanting the tiny wires with the surgical robot. And that enables read-write capability to the neurons. Yes, exactly. It's completely wirelessly. I could have a Neuralink right now, you wouldn't know. And it charges inductively, so you could just basically have an electromagnetic pad that you charge the device with. So yeah, it's like an Apple Watch, exactly. So
except that it's actually a much harder technical challenge to solve, given that there's limit as to how much you eat the brain tissue. Whereas for phones and
Apple Watch,
you don't actually really care if it's sitting on a table.
Sure. So it's got to go through skin and stuff as well in our case. So it is a tougher challenge to charge and to have high bandwidth communications, given that it's got to go through skin and hair and stuff.
We have solved it.
But we have solved it, yeah.
Yeah, so our first step with the telepathy is basically to unlock digital independence for people with paralysis and to allow them to control the computer just with their mind without moving their body. And our goal is to provide them the same level of control, functionality, and reliability that I have when I'm using a computer. Even better than the level of control I have.
It's not a high bar for you. To be clear, this guy, he's controlling this with his brain. So you can't see his hands in this video, but he's not using a mouse and keyboard. Just thinking about how to move the cursor and playing Civilization 6.
No eye tracker.
Right, there's no eye tracking.
He's live streaming it. You can go watch this on Twitter.
Just thinking. That's it.
Just thinking.
This is a couple days ago.
Cursor move here.
Yeah, this is like last night or 2 nights ago. Something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the way he also described it is he's using the
There's many more videos on the platform. Yeah, so he's streaming that live and also can talk and move his head with the problem multitask.
Yeah, you can also, if you join this live stream, you can ask him questions. He'll tell you all about what it's like to move.
Also, I think I haven't played Civilization myself, but I think this is actually not easy mode. This is expert mode.
This is Emperor mode.
Emperor mode.
If you have played Civ, Emperor mode is like the highest difficulty level. Just the point is, this is a cognitively demanding task while live streaming, playing the hardest mode of the game. And he's able to do that while moving the cursor.
Talking, engaging with the audience while playing games.
One of the other games he likes to play a lot is chess. I think it gets lost sometimes that he's actually playing speed chess.
Against me, yeah.
Which requires an incredibly high fidelity degree of control and speed of control in order to be able to win.
Also, another cool stuff about our device is that use it anywhere, anytime. Also on a plane, during a flight, while creating really cool memes of cat. Also, our device unlocks things that previously were impossible for our participant. For example, we were able to connect him to his gaming console, Switch, and play Mario Kart with friends and family. And it was lovely to see them playing together after years that he couldn't do it since his injury.
Imagine if you're sitting one row over from this guy and playing. You look over, he's making a cat meme. No hands, no movement. Yeah.
Live in a real world.
Yeah, it's a strange time.
Yeah, and he loves using the device and using independently daily to watch videos, read, play games using the browser. And the key metrics that we care is to make sure our device is actually useful, is to basically the amount of hours he use the device daily and weekly. And we track it since the surgery. And on weeks that he's not too busy and not traveling, he can even reach 70 hours of using the device a week. This is amazing. He would, of course, love to use it more, but need to run. He needs to sleep sometimes, and also, of course, to charge the device once in a while. Hopefully, we'll improve that over time.
I think that maybe not obvious to people who are watching this. Like, it's a normal MacBook he's controlling. This isn't like some limited edition thing where there's only a few options. Like, you can just do anything that you can do on a MacBook Pro. Same one I have on my desk, actually. It's the exact same one.
And maybe another interesting point is that on the first day he used BCI, he was able to break the previous world record for cursor control just by using the brain. And recently he even doubled it and was able to outperform about 10% of our engineer at Neuralink. And you can be sure that we are very good in this game and very quick. And if you want to check out how you can do it, you can do it on our website. And it's very addictive games.
Yeah, it's a very simple game. You just have to click on the square. But it actually, even though it sounds silly, it's quite it can be it sounds like it can be quite addictive, and it's especially if you get a low score and you think, there's no way I gotta. Anyone who wants to try this, I recommend going to the Neuralink.com website and seeing if you can beat Nolan's record. And you will find that's actually quite difficult to do. This is really with version 1 of the device and with only a small percentage of the electrodes that are working. So this is really just the beginning, but even the beginning is twice as good as the world record. This is important to emphasize. The media has a habit of saying that the glass is 10% empty, but actually it's 90% full. I think it's really quite an accomplishment of the Neuralink team to have achieved with the first patient, the first device, twice the world record for the brain-to-computer bandwidth. That's really an astonishing, an amazingly great outcome. And it's only going to get better from here. So the potential is to ultimately get, I think, to megabit level. So that's partly the long-term goal of improving the bandwidth of the brain-computer interface. If you think about like how low the bandwidth normally is between a human and a device, the average bandwidth is extremely low. It's I said less than 1 bit per second over the course of a day. If there are 86,400 seconds in a day, you're outputting less than that number of bits to any given device, except in perhaps very rare circumstances. This is actually quite important for AI, basically for human AI symbiosis, is just being able to communicate at a speed the AI can follow.
Yeah, just to emphasize again, he's performing at this extremely high level with about 15% of his channels. And so we want to mitigate any of the problems that led to that situation. The brain is a fascinating organ. I'll share with you some of the secrets about the brain. During any typical brain surgery, a small amount of air is introduced into the skull. That's because neurosurgeons like to have as much room as possible around the brain. And so there's this little known control mechanism of allowing the concentration in the blood to rise a bit, which allows the brain to either expand or contract depending on where you target that CO2. But typically neurosurgeons will have the brain shrink by lowering CO2. What we're going to do in our future surgeries is keep the CO2 concentration actually quite normal, maybe even slightly elevated. And that'll allow the brain to stay its normal size and shape during surgery. That should eliminate this air pocket that we saw in the first participant. That air pocket, we think, may have contributed to eating up some of the thread slack as the air bubble migrated to be under the implant and push the brain away from the implant. And so that's easy enough to fix. Another consideration that we want to focus on for our upcoming participants is that the brain, think of it like a really complex folded onion. It's layer upon layer of sheets of neurons all over the surface of the brain folded into this odd-looking shape. the folds of the brain travel down deep into the brain, and along with it go those onion layers of neurons. And if we insert very close to one of the folds where there may be very useful information encoded in neurons, we may end up traveling with our threads parallel to some of the layers of neurons that we're most interested in, avoiding them entirely. To avoid that possibility, we're going to insert in our future participants more close to the middle of the apex of the folds, ensuring that we're crossing the layers of interest, layer 5 of the cortex.
I also think that it's important to highlight here those tiny wires that Elon mentioned. They're a fraction of a human hair. They're very flexible, intentionally so, because the brain's constantly moving and you want electrodes to be moving with the brain, causing less of the scarring. And it's actually impossible for a human, however talented Matthew is, to actually maneuver them. We have a surgical robot that we built that can actually precisely target them in any three-dimensional space, X, Y, as well as Z, with micron level precision, while avoiding vasculature so that you don't disrupt and cause immune response from happening. So we actually have the technology to be able to place them exactly where we want them.
Yeah, it was truly amazing to see the surface of the brain after the robot had inserted all the electrodes on the first participant without a drop of blood in sight. Is really quite an achievement.
Yes, so something that probably most people don't realize is that the brain appears to be somewhat undifferentiated. So if you look at the cortex, it looks like a whole bunch of folds that where maybe like that. It's not obvious just looking at, say, a picture of the brain that the brain is highly differentiated. That you pretty much know exactly where the part of the brain is that controls your right hand and your left hand and your leg and that kind of thing, or vision. It's actually quite precisely located. It's not. Some people might think, look at the brain like, oh, it could be anywhere, but actually, its brain is highly differentiated, even though it doesn't look it. It's yeah.
Do you want to describe how we actually how we identify where to drill the cranium?
Yeah. So we can put a patient that is considering this implant into an MRI, so a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, and ask them to imagine hand movements that, because of the spinal cord injury, don't happen. But just imagining those hand movements causes these areas of the brain to light up in the fMRI scanner. So we have a pretty good idea, based in fact, for each individual participant, which part of their brain is going to respond to imagined movements of the hand. And so we can map those imagined movements, much as we all do when moving a mouse, to controlling a cursor on a screen, even without the use of a mouse.
Yeah, but anyway, I think this is an important point, that it's not like the part of your brain that controls your hand might be anywhere in the cortex. This is not the case. It's going to be in a very specific region, and it's going to be
precision is key too.
Yeah.
The left-handed, right-handed thing in my mind too. If you're right-handed, you want the device on the left side, contralateral side to the hand. That's your dominant.
Yeah, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your brain.
Another of the risk mitigations we're looking at in the future is that the implant has a certain size. The depth of the bottom of the implant is actually thinner than the average human skull. And so what we want to be able to do is control the size of the gap under the implant, give the threads that travel from the implant into the brain as much slack as possible. We didn't do this in the first participant because we didn't want to manipulate any of their tissue that we didn't absolutely have to. In upcoming implants, our plan is to sculpt the surface of the skull very intentionally to minimize the gap under the implant, such that the bottom of the implant travels perfectly flush with the normal contour of the inner side of the skull. That will put the implant closer to the brain. It will eliminate some of the tension on the threads, and we think it will reduce some of the tendency of threads to retract.
And we actually built a tool to do.
Yeah, this is a very important detail. You really want the inner contour of the skull to be flush, so that the implant, the brain doesn't want to pucker up into the gap. That's really quite a big deal. Minimizing the air pocket and the implant being flush with the inside contour of the skull are two very important.
The additional benefit here is that you do see some amount of stick up, what we call stick up, so you minor bump in the head, but this actually eliminates that even further.
Yes, really our goal is that if you run your hand over the top of the skull, you don't feel any bump, you don't feel any device. And that even if someone was bald, you wouldn't really even notice it. And then from the inner contour of the skull, the brain, from a physical standpoint, doesn't really notice that there's a divot in the skull because there's no divot.
Okay, another aspect of the human brain that obviously differs from any of the animals that we tested in is that the human brain is a lot bigger. And so you may not realize that means the human brain moves quite a bit more than any of these other smaller brained creatures. And so when we open the skull, we see the brain travel toward and away from the robot about 3 millimeters in total as the heart beats and the breathing takes place. And so that movement, it adds a small challenge for the robot in precisely choosing a depth to insert each thread. It's not an enormous challenge, and we've already upgraded the robot's capabilities to be able to even more precisely target depth in even a very rapidly moving brain with a high amplitude of movement. You may think the most obvious mitigation for threads that pulled out of the brain is to insert them deeper. We think so too. And so we're going to broaden the range of depths at which we insert threads. For the very first participant, we had an enormous amount of data from our animal work, and we had very highly optimized our insertion depth to maximize the crossing of the layers of interest in the cortex with the electrodes that we're recording from. Now that we know retraction is a possibility, we're going to insert at a variety of depths that even in several cases of differing amounts of retracting threads, we're going to have electrodes at the proper depth. And with the deepest threads, be able to track how much retraction has occurred across the surface of the brain from each thread. And so we're going to both have more threads in the right layer and have better data on how much retraction has occurred.
If you're a BCI nerd, you might know that being able to control individual Z depth per thread is not something that most neural interface devices offer. Most neural interface devices are a static, fixed, rigid array that you push in and all the electrodes are on depth. To be able to do this is actually pretty novel part of the robot.
Yeah, the historical approach is to actually pound in a sort of bed of nails with an air hammer into the brain.
It looked crazy. Just not a camera. This is. It sounds somewhat barbaric. This is not what we do, but this is what's been done before. Is literally just hammering in what looks like a bed of nails into the brain, which
that's even
actually works. It's astonishing that it actually works.
And some people like manual, like DBS probes, you're just sticking in by hand. Neurosurgeons just guiding them in.
Those are several orders of magnitude more volume of brain tissue that you're destroying compared to what we're doing.
But that deep brain stimulation stuff does actually work. It actually helps people a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great product. Yeah.
But I think we'll be able to do a much more finessed version of that down the road. It's really difficult. The Neuralink device is something that really absolutely minimizes damage to the brain, absolutely minimizes the load on the patient, and the goal is to allow someone to live a completely normal life. You won't even notice that someone even has the device. So, like I said, the ability to control your computer and phone, that's our telepathy, and then next device being able to allow people to see that could not see before. And in fact, you could allow people to see Geordi LaForge in Star Trek in any, whatever.
Infrared.
Yeah, infrared, ultraviolet, radar. So I think another way of saying it is that we want to give people superpowers. So it's not just that we're restoring your prior brain functionality, but that you actually have functionality far greater than a normal human. That's a super big deal.
And I also think oftentimes the questions that we get a lot is, why do you have to actually go into the brain? What if you place it on the surface or outside the skull? Basically, the long story short, the physics of how it works, you really need to get the sensors, which are these facing in the brain, next to the source, which is as close to it as possible. Otherwise, what you get is you get a population response and not be able to do the level of controls that we believe.
Yeah, maybe a good sort of analogy would be like if you're trying to understand what goes on in a factory, you need to go into the factory. You can't just put a stethoscope on the wall and try to figure out what's going on. Like anything on the outside of the, trying to read things from the outside is like putting a stethoscope on the wall of a factory, trying to understand what's going on in the factory. It's not going to be effective. It's got to be, threads are going to be in there. But I just want to emphasize again, like the goal is to give people superpowers, not just to restore prior functionality. It's very exciting, and I think that should give hope to a lot of people in the world that the future is going to be exciting and inspiring, and the technology is going to give them superpowers. That's amazing. Yeah. And can you multitask with it? Yeah, in fact, if you look at Nolan's streaming, and you can just check out Nolan's streams on the X platform, he's multitasking all the time. So he's while talking and listening to podcasts. And, yeah, exactly. It's really just if you're using your hands and you're playing a video game while talking.
Don't take our word for it. Just go watch. I mean, he's out there on the internet doing his thing.
Yeah, exactly. So can you do keyboard shortcuts, or is it just the mouse?
Yeah, that's actually what we're working on right now.
Sure. So currently he's working with the mouse, but we are also exploring decoding more dimensions outside from the neural activity, multiple clicks, so to do shortcuts or just able to control more games, like control our Facebook controller. But also in the future, we plan to expand to decode the text, not just the mouse control, but also allow participants to.
Actually, so maybe going back to the discussion of thread retraction, one of the very exciting parts to me about this story is that we're able to do so much with 15% of channels. When you have more channels, what that actually offers you is not just faster mouse control, because in the motor cortex, neurons don't all represent the same thing. So if you're trying to understand what an individual finger is trying to do, you might or might not have an electrode next to it. And the more channels you have in the brain, the higher likelihood you have representation or decodability of all fingers on the hand. And so if you're trying to do something like output text at a fast rate, which is something that matters a lot for people who are completely locked in, who cannot speak at all, who are trying to just say I love you to a loved one in their family, or ask for a glass of water or a scratch or whatever. Being able to type at a fast rate is extremely important. And the more fingers you have access to, the higher probability you can do that efficiently. And yeah, I'm super excited about how the ceiling is we can get to as we solve this stutter traction issue.
Yeah, we're currently at approximately 10 bits per second peak rate, but ultimately we want to get to megabit, and I think ultimately whole brain interface, I think many years from now, I think gigabit level is possible. So that's pretty astonishing. This is still version 1 of our device. As we mentioned, it's version 1 with only 15% of the threads working. The current device has 64 threads with 16 electrodes on each thread. Our next device has threads with 8 electrodes per thread. Because as we get more confident about where exactly to place the thread, you need fewer electrodes per thread. So we can essentially, with the current device, without substantial changes, potentially double the bandwidth if we are accurate with the placement of the threads. And then our next generation device will have maybe
even more channels.
Yeah. So
3,000 in the year.
Yeah, so next device we're aiming for 3,000 channels. This will just keep getting better and better, really moving up, I think, in orders of magnitude in factors of 10, basically, in what kind of bandwidth. I think it won't be all that long before someone with a Neuralink device can communicate faster than someone who has a fully functional body, and I think faster than the fastest speed typist or auctioneer.
The esports tournaments are going to be...
Like, you literally won't be able to speak faster than someone can communicate with a Neuralink telepathy device.
It may be a very interesting part of this. Basically, we currently connect to standard inputs to the computer through mouse and keyboards. But very soon, as we will have a much broader bandwidth, we need to think about new ways to actually build the interface for their devices. This is something that we're very excited.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because the current input devices are centered around human hands.
Yeah.
So it's like we've got these little meat sticks that we move, and there's a certain rate at which you can move your fingers, and so we've got like the mouse and the keyboard and with a joystick control, Xbox controller or something like that. But you really don't need that. You don't need, since if you're not trying to use your hands, you actually don't need those conventional control mechanisms. And so this is why ultimately I think you'll be able to do conceptual telepathy, like where you can communicate entire concepts to someone else with a Neuralink or to the computer.
Even today, we have some problems here where if you don't feel the mouse clicking under your finger, how do you know it actually happened? Because you're seeing it on the screen, but you don't actually feel the mouse click. You don't have the proprioceptive feedback of the keys under your fingertips or the trackpad under your... So there's all sorts of interesting UX challenges of how to actually give the user some sense of what their decoder is actually doing, or what the Neuralink is actually doing when they're trying to use it.
Wireless.
Yeah, it's Bluetooth. Just a Bluetooth connection, just like how your normal Apple mouse or like Apple Magic keyboard connects to your computer. Same exact thing. In fact, we can basically have this exposed as an HID interface if we want. It's just the name of the protocol for sending bits from a mouse into a computer. Yeah, I can plug into basically anything.
Yeah, I think we chose that interface because it's ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Basically, any devices have Bluetooth capabilities. Our long-term goal is to actually have our own protocol that is safe and secure. But for now, we've chosen it for interoperability.
The question is, can a Neuralink chip repair the paralysis in the long term? We can't do that right now. We have done preliminary work implanting a second Neuralink in the spinal cord, and we can restore naturalistic looking hand and leg movements in animal models. But this isn't something that don't hold your breath waiting for it. It's going to be a while. We've got a lot of work to do. But yes, there's no reason in theory that we can't repair paralysis.
Yeah, essentially, there's no physics barrier to fully solving paralysis. That is perhaps a way to say it, that you've got signals coming from your motor cortex that if they are transferred past the point where nerves are damaged, essentially it's basically a communications bridge. So you bridge the communications from the motor cortex past the point in the neck or spine where the nerves are damaged. And it is possible from a physics standpoint to restore full body functionality. It's a very hard technical problem, but there is nothing that prevents it happening from a physics standpoint. In terms of next phase of rollout, we really want to make sure that we make as much progress as possible between each Neuralink patient. So we're only just moving now to our second Neuralink patient, but we hope to have, if things go well, high single digits this year. And I don't know, maybe this is somewhat dependent on regulatory approval and how much technical progress we make. But within a few years, hopefully thousands.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is important to highlight is that it's not that we built only one device and one surgery. We've done hundreds of surgery. We built thousands and thousands of devices, even for just the ability to earth any sort of low frequency failure mode. We have already been investing very heavily in infrastructure to be able to scale this thing on the device manufacturing side, as well as on the surgery side of things. We want to be able to help as many people as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
We go through obviously the appropriate hurdles that are regulatory challenges and proving out the device with.
Yeah, the device implantation really needs to become almost entirely, if not entirely, automatic. In the same way that, say, LASIK eye surgery is done, you don't have an ophthalmologist with a laser cutter by hand. That would be crazy. But the ophthalmologist oversees the LASIK machine and makes sure that the settings are correct. And then the machine does everything and restores your eyesight. It's really remarkable how many people have had their eyesight restored with LASIK, and I think there's another one called Smile. They keep making it better. We need to have something similar for a Neuralink implantation, so that you basically sit down and whatever whatever kind of upgrades or brain fixes are needed, that's reviewed by a medical expert. So we want to make sure that it's reviewed correctly, but it really needs to be automatic. So you sit down and within 10 minutes you have a Neuralink device installed. Very fast. It's very cyberpunk, Deus Ex if you played those games.
When will Neuralink start to interface with other devices like wheelchair? It's a great question. We're currently focusing on controlling computers and unlock independence in the virtual world. Of course, our plan is, as we mentioned earlier, robotic arm and wheelchair unlock independence in the physical world. This, of course, add additional risk if you make mistakes with your computer. There's some additional risks to that, but we are working with the FDA to allow us to do.
Well, it seems like if the wheelchair has
an app,
the wheelchair just needs to have an interface.
It does. Yeah.
So if the wheelchair has a Bluetooth interface, you could just Bluetooth interface to the wheelchair.
Yeah.
And that's probably something we should do
pretty
soon. Yeah,
It's really a matter of paperwork of showing that you don't want to drive off a cliff.
I think we can limit the speed. So it doesn't go careening off into disaster.
Yeah.
But so just make it go slowly at first. Yeah. But yeah, so being able to really the Neuralink device just should work generally for anything that's got a Bluetooth interface,
including potentially an Optimus.
Yes, yeah, you could communicate with Optimus. Yep, absolutely. Optimus will also be able to talk to Optimus, but like
why not just beam it?
But you could just instead of talking, you could just beam it directly. Or if someone has lost the use of speech, then they can still communicate to an Optimus. They can communicate telepathically to Optimus or by Bluetooth, and so even if someone has completely lost the ability to speak, they could still control their computer or phone.
Also, if you have an Optimus and you have a Neuralink, you can just directly map the brain signal to control of the physical arm of the robot, and that's a very meaningful thing. If you're folks that have spinal cord injury, one of the biggest requests is to be able to scratch yourself. This is something that's quite annoying, actually. And if you have a scratch on your face, you can't fall asleep until you scratch it. It's very convenient to be able to move something physically towards you to be able to scratch. Similar things like eating food. If you need somebody to feed you, it's very hard to have dinner with friends in a way that is a normal social experience. And so if you can feed yourself, pick up a fork and actually eat a piece of chicken on your own, that's a big deal. It prevents and saves a lot of interactions with caretakers and other people in your life that you rely on to take care of you. It really increases your...
I think an exciting possibility long-term also is to say, if you take parts of the Optimus humanoid robot and you combine that with a Neuralink, let's say somebody has lost their arms or legs, we could actually attach an Optimus arm or Optimus legs and do a Neuralink implant so that the motor commands from your brain that would go to your biological arms now go to your robot arms or robot legs. And again, you have basically cybernetic superpowers.
Actually, so the latency from the Neuralink to your hand would probably be slightly faster than it is just to go to your physical hand. So you can imagine if you're a piano player or I don't know, anything that requires extremely fast hand movements, that you could actually have a pretty imbalanced right-hand robotic arm control versus left-hand physical arm control. That's one of them.
Yeah, like I said, it's just a cyberpunk Deus Ex in a future where you have cybernetic upgrades that are actually better than your biological, and certainly we'll have a much as particularly as we expand to a large number of customers or patients for Neuralink, the understanding of the brain will improve dramatically, because really there isn't a very fine-grained understanding of the brain today because it's just the sensors aren't good enough. You got fMRI, which is pretty good, but it's still not as good as actually having high bandwidth electrodes in the brain.
Yeah, I think this is underappreciated as a research tool to move that whole effort forward of really knowing what the physical substance of human thought is. We don't know to the degree that we need to. So Neuralink is actually a very powerful research tool.
Yeah, I think we can ultimately understand and fix quite severe psychosis, or if somebody's got like
a delusion that they have a chip in their brain.
I was wondering if you're going to mention that one. We just want to be clear, there's only one person with a Neuralink chip in their brain. So for people out there who think we've put a chip in their brain, we'd like to assure you, for what it's worth, you probably won't believe us, but we did not put a chip in your brain, okay? So there's actually a remarkable number of people who think we have put a chip in their brain, but we have not. But in the future, if you would like us to put a chip in your brain, which will perhaps help with the issue of thinking that you have a chip in your brain, then we will be able to do. There are people that have severe schizophrenia. They've got basically things that their brain is malfunctioning in some way. And this is actually due to really like physical circuitry issues. You can think of the brain as really it's a biological computer, and if some of the circuits are crossed, it's gonna it's gonna crash, or it's gonna have issues that. But with a Neuralink device, we can fix those issues and give someone who has say severe schizophrenia or psychosis of some kind, allow them to live a normal life. I think that is one of the likely things in the future. Yeah, you can certainly imagine. I'm sure people have like parents, grandparents who have memory that's not working as well as it used to be. Sometimes they forget who their grandchildren are or what day it is, and this is something that a Neuralink device could help fix.
That's actually one of the personal reasons. In many ways, forms of you're literally losing part of your identity.
Yeah.
Which is a very
And it's really it's a glitch in the biological computer that is a fixable glitch. It's a short circuit essentially.
How does the device charge, and how long does the charge last? Yeah, so the current version that Nolan has, it lasts between 4 to 5 hours on a single charge, and it takes about minutes to charge. The thing we've learned from Nolan is that's actually one of the main limiters for him using it more. It's actually pretty hard to use a product more than like 70 hours a week.
But that's about what he has used it for in some weeks?
Yeah, 70 hours in a week, yeah. Just for context, like you sleep roughly 8 hours a night. So we're doing better than the bed. Like the bed is 56 hours a week of use roughly. And so 70 hours a week of uses. I challenge you to think about products that you've actually used for that duration.
That's again, some of these points are worth like emphasizing again, like that Nolan, our first Neuralink recipient, has used the Neuralink device for 70 hours in a week, which is incredible.
Probably won't enjoy that I'm sharing his computer use publicly, but I mean, I assure you it's for productive things only. No. But actually, so one of the things we've learned is that in the next version of the device, we really need to double or increase that battery life. And so I think, DJ, the next version is going to be double. Without increasing the charge. Correct. And charging time, double the battery life, meaning you should get roughly 8 hours of use.
And the goal is to actually get to all day use. So you can just charge maybe in your sleep, or a sleeping pillow.
Exactly. As soon as you've got 16 hours of usage, then you basically have 24 hours of usage because it can charge while you're sleeping.
One other thing that's important, I think, to call out here is if you're paralyzed, you can't, put the charger over your head yourself. And so it's important to think about, it's not just a duration of battery use, but also can you recharge it yourself independently? So we spend a lot of time thinking about how to make that feasible, because then that means that you can, this is what Nolan does, you can use the device, charge it, use the device, charge it, use the device without needing anybody to come in and help you with that, which is a big deal if you're trying to play Civ until 5 a.m. at night when your family's asleep.
And the way in which he does that is that there is a charger coil that's about this big, and we actually put it in the sleeve of a hat.
Little beanie.
Or a beanie, and then he wears it and then says with the voice command, charge.
Charger energize. That's the one he likes.
How would writing work? Yeah, the current device that Nolan has is reading. So it's trying to read his essentially wrist movement from one hand. That's also worth pointing out. In the future, I think it would be pretty cool to Nolan a second implant that would allow the other hand to be used and also have higher active electrode count. So then you could essentially play games two-handed, because that's normally how you play games. But then with writing, it's really just it's an electrical impulse. Instead of reading electrical impulses from the neurons, you issue an electrical impulse, which is obviously critical for vision. So vision is writing, which is just triggering an electrical impulse in the vision part of the brain, and that activates a pixel. So we actually do have this working in monkeys, and we have it working with monkeys for a while now, where you can flash a pixel and then you watch where the monkey, obviously the monkey's a little surprised to see, hey, there's a flash here and a flash there, but it gets used to it after a while. But you can see that the pixel is in the right location because the monkey's eyes will dart to that location.
It's not on the screen. There's no pixel on the screen.
There's no pixel on the screen,
Pixel in the brain.
Yeah. You just verify that you're triggering a pixel in the right part of the brain. So, the initial resolution for vision will be relatively low, sort of Atari graphics type of thing. But over time, it could potentially be better than normal vision.
Motor applications, as Bliss mentioned, there is
feedback.
Right? There's a proprioceptive feedback. There's a tactile feedback.
Especially for a robot arm, like if you're trying to grasp a cup, you need to know you got it.
Yeah. One egg.
An egg.
It's a very much a delicate balance of not just initiating the movement, but getting the feedback and controlling it accordingly. So there is a somatosensory cortex that's right adjacent to motor cortex that could be motor movements.
Any changes in neural growth after the device is inserted. We don't see any signs of neural damage, but I guess we have seen some rebound on some of the electrodes, right?
Correct. And then also, brain is very plastic.
It's not that plastic.
It does diminish quite a bit after age 20.
Throughout childhood, especially when you get to about 25, brain really done cooking. There is a little bit of damage done with each insertion, but it's a minuscule amount compared to anything else out there. And it's an easy amount of damage to recover from, and it's really only detectable on cutting pieces of the brain after the animal is no longer alive and looking at them under a microscope. You can't really tell during life that there's been any.
Another way to interpret this question, have the changes in neural growth after the device is inserted. One way to interpret that is like the user learning how to use the device. And I think on that side of things, there's been tremendous progress. He's put in hundreds of hours trying to figure out the best way to use this device because he really thinks that if he can figure this out, he can help share this knowledge. He's like on Friday night at 8 p.m., he's starting a session of figuring out himself how to push his own performance to the next level. And that's really a unique learning process because there's not many people in the world that have had the experience of moving something. And so there's a lot of nuance to, okay, how exactly should I imagine or attempt to move my wrist to get the thing to move? Yeah, he's really dialed that into it.
Also, just the sheer number of hours that he's
Insane.
using, even in the past 6 months, right?
Yeah.
In many ways, he's using it in his travel, in his plane ride. Effectively, PCI has left the lab.
Yeah.
One of the questions is how close we're converting thoughts into text. Right now, it's more about moving cursor from the screen on a virtual keyboard. But long term, you should be able to really transmit entire words faster than anyone could possibly type.
I'm able to type hello world today, but we're still in the early days of making that a polished experience.
The other things that we're looking at is sign language, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is a movement of into.
Yeah, that's true.
Was the brain trying to naturally push the threads out? This is a universal feature of any implant in the body. The body tries to reject it, and the goal of the surgeons and the technology team is to fight that. And so with artificial hips and with screws in the spine, we've done a really good job of finding biocompatible materials and techniques to fix those implants in the body. Past a certain age, it's getting hard to find someone without some kind of implant, knee kind of screws in their spine. And so we've got this problem pretty well solved. To answer your question, yes, the body is trying to get rid of any implant, but we can ensure that basically can't.
It's also worth highlighting that the threads have not actually moved in the past 5 months. There's some still minor movements in terms of some maybe getting pushed in a little bit, pushed out a little bit, but it's more or less very stable and the reason for that is, once you do a brain surgery, it takes some time for the tissues to come in and then, the scar tissue or the neomembrane to actually come in and then anchor the threads in place. And once that happens, it has been stable and you've seen much movement.
That's where the world record performance starts to come in.
Yeah, that was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, the threads, it is important that the threads be extremely tiny. If they're extremely tiny, then the brain does not, the smaller they are, the less likely the brain is to react to them. That's why we want the threads to be extremely tiny and also to minimize any damage to neurons.
On that note, we do plan to actually share some of the tissue response in detail in some of the later upcoming updates.
Yeah. It is quite it's challenging on many fronts to do something like this because you're trying to read and write electrical signals, but you need to have the threads themselves need to be electrically isolated and not subject to corrosion in the body. So like the just metal by itself is somewhat subject to corrosion or being attacked. So it's like in terms of the various coatings and things to actually make this electrode work while not actually eroding its performance over time is very difficult.
Human bodies are a very harsh environment.
Very harsh environment.
It's a bag of salt water with bad sensors that's elevated temperature that is well regulated. I'm sure people have experienced dropping their electronic devices in the seawater and in an instant.
So we're going to wrap this up soon. There's like a few last questions. Yes. So a good question. So what about upgrades? So yeah, we do think it's going to be important to be able to upgrade the device over time. Just like you wouldn't want like an iPhone 1 stuck in your brain forever. If you've got an iPhone 15, you probably want the iPhone 15, not the iPhone 1. So I think people over time will be able to upgrade their Neuralink. So we'll take the Neuralink device out and put a new one in. And we have done this with some of our animals. And they've actually, in one case, we upgraded a device 3 times and with a pig.
Yeah, we did it with a monkey as well.
Oh, monkey,
he's able to do PCI.
Yeah, so, and he's doing fine.
Yeah, Pager has the latest implant.
Yeah. Actually, he hit his record with the last.
Yeah, with an upgrade.
But still beat him though.
Still beat him. Yes, this is true. Humans are top of the species leaderboard right now.
Pager's like 8 or something?
Pager's like 8.5 BPS.
Okay.
Well, that's a very high score.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to put Pager down. And also to train a monkey to do that is like a whole challenge on its own. We have the best animal care team.
Yeah, I just do want to emphasize we do our absolute best to take care of the animals. And when we had a USDA inspector come through, she said that this was the nicest animal facility she's ever seen in her entire life.
They
So
order breakfast on an app.
the monkey orders room service.
Yeah, I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, we have monkey room service, which is rare. We're the only ones who offer monkey room service. We really do everything we can to maximize the welfare of the animals. All right, with that, thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you found this interesting.